The Revised Julian calendar, also known as the Milankovitch calendar, or, less formally, New Calendar, is a calendar developed and proposed by the Serbian scientist Milutin Milanković in 1923, which effectively discontinued the 340 years of divergence between the naming of dates sanctioned by those Eastern Orthodox churches adopting it, and the Gregorian calendar that has come to predominate worldwide. This calendar was intended to replace the ecclesiastical calendar based on the Julian calendar hitherto in use by all of the Eastern Orthodox Church. The Revised Julian calendar temporarily aligned its dates with the Gregorian calendar proclaimed in 1582 by Pope Gregory XIII for adoption by the Christian world. Implementation. The new calendar was proposed for adoption by the Orthodox churches at the Pan-Orthodox Congress of Constantinople in May 1923, and subsequently it was adopted by several of the autocephalous Orthodox churches. The synod was chaired by controversial Patriarch Meletius IV of Constantinople and called Pan-Orthodox by its supporters, but only the Patriarch of Constantinople and the Serbian Patriarch were represented. There were no representatives of the other members of the original Orthodox Pentarchy from the largest Orthodox Church, the Russian Orthodox Church. This synod synchronized the new calendar with the Gregorian calendar by specifying that the 1st of October of the Julian calendar would be 14 October in the new calendar, thus dropping 13 days. It then adopted the leap rule of Milankovitch, an astronomical delegate to the synod representing the kingdom of Serbs, Croats and Slovenes. Milankovitch selected this rule because its mean year was within 2 seconds of the then current length of the mean tropical year. The present vernal equinox year, however, is about 12 seconds longer, in terms of mean solar days. The synod also proposed the adoption of an astronomical rule for Easter. Easter was to be the Sunday after the midnight to midnight day at the meridian of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, during which the first full moon after the vernal equinox occurs. Although the instant of the full moon must occur after the instant of the vernal equinox, it may occur on the same day. If the full moon occurs on a Sunday, Easter is the following Sunday. However, all Eastern Orthodox churches rejected this rule and continue to use the Julian calendar to determine the date of Easter. Arithmetic. The following are Gregorian minus Revised Julian date differences, calculated for the beginning of March in each century year, which is where differences arise or disappear, until 10,000 AD. These are exact arithmetic calculations, not depending on any astronomy. A negative difference means that the proleptic Revised Julian calendar was behind the proleptic Gregorian calendar. The Revised Julian calendar is the same as the Gregorian calendar from the 1st of March 1600 to the 28th of February 2800. A positive difference means that the Revised Julian calendar will be ahead of the Gregorian calendar, which will first occur on the 1st of March 2800. In 900 Julian years there are 900 quarters equals 225 leap days. The Revised Julian leap rule emits 7 of 9 century leap years, leaving 225 minus 7 equals 218 leap days per 900-year cycle. Thus, the calendar mean year is 365 plus 218 900ths days, but this is actually a double cycle that reduces to 365 plus 109 450ths equals 365.242 days, or exactly 365 days 5 hours 48 minutes 48 seconds, which is exactly 24 4 seconds shorter than the Gregorian mean year of 365.2425 days. So in the long term, on average, the Revised Julian calendar pulls ahead of the Gregorian calendar by 1 day in 3,600 years. The number of days per Revised Julian cycle equals 900 times 365 plus 218 equals 328,718 days. Taking mod 7 leaves a remainder of 5, so like the Julian calendar, but unlike the Gregorian calendar, the Revised Julian calendar cycle does not contain a whole number of weeks. Therefore, a full repetition of the Revised Julian leap cycle with respect to the 7-day weekly cycle is 7 times the cycle length equals 7 times 900 equals 6,300 years. Epoch. The epoch of the Julian calendar was on the Saturday before the Monday that was the epoch of the Gregorian calendar. In other words, Gregorian the 1st of January 01 AD equals Julian the 3rd of January 01 AD. The Revised Julian reform not only changed the leap rule but also made the epoch the same as that of the Gregorian calendar. This seems to have been carried out implicitly, and even scientific articles make no mention of it. Nevertheless, it is impossible to implement calendrical calculations and calendar date conversion software without appreciating this detail and taking the 2-day shift into account. If the original Julian calendar epoch is mistakenly used in such calculations, then there is no way to reproduce the currently accepted dating of the Revised Julian calendar, which yields no difference between Gregorian and Revised Julian dates in the 21st century. March Equinox. The following is a scatterplot of actual astronomical northward equinox moments as numerically integrated by Solex 11 using DE 421 mode with extended floating point precision, high integration order, and force solar mass loss. Solex can automatically search for northern hemisphere spring equinox moments by finding when the solar declination crosses the celestial equator northward, and then it outputs the data as the terrestrial time day and fraction of day relative to the 1st of January 2000 at noon. The progressive tidal slowing of the Earth rotation rate was accounted for by subtracting delta t as calculated by the Spinacomius polynomial set, recommended at the NASA Eclipses website to obtain the J2000.0-RELATIVE universal time moments, which were then properly converted to Revised Julian dates and Jerusalem local apparent time, taking local apparent midnight as the beginning of each calendar day. The year range of the chart was limited to dates before the year 4400 AD. By then, delta t is expected to accumulate to about 6 hours, with an uncertainty of less than 21/2 of an hour. The chart shows that the long-term equinox drift of the Revised Julian calendar is quite satisfactory, at least until 4400 AD. The medium-term wobble spans about 2 days because, like the Gregorian calendar, the leap years of the Revised Julian calendar are not smoothly spread. They occur mostly at intervals of 4 years, but there are occasional 8-year gaps. Evidently, each of the authorities responsible for the Gregorian and Revised Julian calendars, respectively, accepted a modest amount of medium-term equinox wobble for the sake of traditionally perceived leap rule mental arithmetic simplicity. Therefore, the wobble is essentially a curiosity that is of no practical or ritual concern. Adoption. The new calendar has been adopted by the Orthodox churches of Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, Greece, Cyprus, Albania, Romania, Poland, and Bulgaria called the New Calendarists. It has not been adopted by the Orthodox churches of Jerusalem, Russia, Serbia, Georgia, Mount Athos and the Greek Old Calendarists, although Milankovitch stated that the Russian Orthodox Church adopted the new calendar in 1923. The present Church continues to use the Julian calendar for both its fixed festivals and for Easter. A solution to this conundrum is to hypothesize that it was accepted only by the short-lived schismatic Renovationist Church, which had seized church buildings with the support of the Soviet government while Patriarch Tikhon was under house arrest. After his release on the 15th of July 1923, he declared that all Renovationist decrees were without grace, presumably including its acceptance of the new calendar. Defense. The basic justification for the new calendar is the known errors of the Julian calendar, which will in the course of time lead to a situation in which those following the Julian calendar will be reckoning the month of December during the heat of summer, August and its feasts during the deep cold of winter, Pascha during the autumn season, and the November feasts in the springtime. This would conflict with the Church's historic practice of celebrating Christ's birth on the 25th of December, a date chosen for a number of reasons. One of the reasons mentioned by Bennett is the time of the winter solstice, when the days begin to lengthen again as the physical sun makes its reappearance, along with the fact that Christ has traditionally been recognized by Christians as the metaphorical and spiritual sun who fulfills Malachi's prophetic words, "The Sun of Righteousness will shine with healing in its wings." The identification, based on this prophecy, of Jesus Christ as the Son of Righteousness is found many times in writings of the early Church Fathers and follows from many New Testament references linking Jesus with imagery of sun and light. The defenders of the new calendar do not regard the Julian calendar as having any particular divine sanction. Rather, they view the Julian calendar as a device of human technology, and thus subject to improvement or replacement just as many other devices of technology that were in use at the dawn of the Church have been replaced with newer forms of technology. Supporters of the new calendar can also point to certain pastoral problems that are resolved by its adoption. Parishes observing the Julian calendar are faced with the problem that parishioners are supposed to continue fasting throughout Western Christmas and New Year, seasons when the families and friends are likely to be feasting and celebrating New Year's, often with parties, use of liquor, etc. This situation presents obvious temptations, which are eliminated when the new calendar is adopted. Another pastoral problem is the tendency of some local American media to focus attention each year on the 7th of January, the 25th of December celebration of Christmas, even in localities where most Orthodox parishes follow the new calendar. So too, in all likelihood, do certain non-Orthodox churches profit from the Orthodox remaining old style, since the 7th of January observance of Christmas among the Orthodox tends to focus attention on ethnic identifications of the feast, rather than on its Christian dogmatic significance, which in turn tends to foster the impression in the public mind that for the Orthodox, the feast of Christ's Nativity is centered on the observance of the Julian date of that feast, rather than on the commemoration of Christ's birth. Such a focus appears to the defenders of the Revised Julian calendar and to many non-Orthodox as well as a practice that is charming and quaint, but also anachronistic, unscientific and hence ultimately unreasonable and even cultish. Some Orthodox themselves may unwittingly reinforce this impression by ignorance of their own faith and by a consequential exclusive or excessive focus on the calendar issue. It has been observed, anecdotally, that some Russians cannot cite any difference in belief or practice between the faith and the faith of Western Christians, except for the 13-day calendar difference. Against the new calendar, the argument is made that inasmuch as the use of the Julian calendar was implicit in the decision of the First Ecumenical Council at Nicaea, no authority less than an ecumenical council may change this decision. However, the fact is that that council made no decision or decree at all concerning the Julian calendar. Its silence constituted an implicit acceptance not of the Julian calendar, but of the civil calendar, which happened to be, at the time, the Julian calendar. By virtue of this, defenders of the new calendar argue that no decision by an ecumenical council was or is necessarily today in order to revise the Julian calendar, and further, that by making the revision, the Church stays with the spirit of Nicaea, i.e. by keeping with the civil calendar in all its essentials, while conversely, failure to keep with the civil calendar could be seen as a departure from the spirit of Nicaea, i.e. in this respect. Lastly, it is argued that since the adoption of the new calendar evidently involves no change in a departure from the theological or the ethical teachings of Orthodox Christianity, but rather amounts to a merely disciplinary or administrative change, a clock correction of sorts, the authority to enact that change falls within the competency of contemporary, local episcopal authority. Implicit acceptance of this line of reasoning, or something very close to it, underlies the decision to adopt the new calendar by those Orthodox churches which have done so. It follows that, in general, the defenders of the new calendar hold the view that in localities where the Church as episcopal authority has elected to adopt the new calendar, but where some have broken communion with those implementing this change, it is those who have broken communion who have in fact introduced the disunity, rather than the new calendar itself for those who have adopted it, although most would agree that attempts at various times to mandate the use of the new calendar through compulsion have magnified the disunity, to the objection that the new calendar has created problems by adjusting only the fixed calendar, while leaving all of the commemorations in the movable cycle on the original Julian calendar. The obvious answer, of course, is that the 1923 Synod, which adopted the new calendar, did in fact change the movable calendar as well, and that calendar problems introduced as a result of the adoption of the new calendar alone would not have existed had the corrections to the movable calendar also been implemented. According to the defenders of the new calendar, the argument that the 25th of December observance of Christmas is a purely secular observance and is therefore an unsuitable time for Orthodox Christians to celebrate Christ's nativity, is plainly inaccurate, since the 25th of December observances of Christ's birth among Western Christians obviously occur overwhelmingly in places of worship and involve hymns, prayers, scripture readings, religious dramas, liturgical concerts, and the like. Defenders of the new calendar further note that, to the extent that the 25th of December is a secular observance in the Western world, the 7th of January appears to be becoming one as well, in Orthodox countries that continue to follow the old calendar. In Russia, for example, the 7th of January is no longer a spiritual holiday for Orthodox Christians alone, but has now become a national holiday for all Russians, including non-Orthodox Christians, people of other religions, and non-believers. Where this will lead in the end remains to be seen. Among other arguments made by the defenders of the new calendar for the view are those made on the basis of truth. Arguments from truth can take two forms. If a calendar is a system for reckoning time based on the motions of astronomical bodies, specifically the movements of sun and moon. In the case of the church calendar, and if precision or accuracy is understood as one aspect of truth, then a calendar that is more accurate and precise with respect to the motions of those bodies must be regarded as truer than one which is less precise. In this regard, some of those who champion the old calendar as truth may appear to those following the new calendar as the defenders of a fiction. Some defenders of the new calendar argue that the celebration, in any way or form, of two feasts of Christ's nativity within the same liturgical year is not possible, since according to the faith there is only one celebration of the feast in a given year. On this basis, they argue that those who prefer to observe a secular feast of the Nativity on the 25th of December and a religious one on the 7th of January, are in respect of the truth that there is but one feast of the Nativity each year. Criticism. While the new calendar has been adopted by many of the smaller national churches, a majority of Orthodox Christians continue to adhere to the traditional Julian calendar, and there has been much acrimony between the two parties over the decades since the change, leading sometimes even to violence, especially in Greece. Critics see the change in calendar as an unwarranted innovation influenced by Western society. They say that no sound theological reason has been given for changing the calendar, that the only reasons advanced are social. The proposal for change was introduced by Meletios Metaharkis, a patriarch whose canonical status has been disputed and who is alleged to have been a Freemason, which is forbidden by the Orthodox Church. The argument is also made that since the use of the Julian calendar was implicit in the decision of the First Ecumenical Council at Nicaea, which standardized the calculation of the date of Pascha, no authority less than an ecumenical council may change it. It is further argued that the adoption of the new calendar in some countries and not in others has broken the liturgical unity of the Eastern Orthodox churches, undoing the decision made by the Council of Bishops at Nicaea to decree that all local churches celebrate Easter on the same day. The Emperor Constantine, writing to the bishops absent from the council to notify them of the decision, argued, "Think then how unseemly it is, that on the same day some should be fasting whilst others are seated at a banquet." Liturgical objections to the new calendar stem from the fact that it adjusts only those liturgical celebrations that occur on fixed calendar dates, leaving all of the commemorations on the movable cycle on the original Julian calendar. This upsets the harmony and balance of the liturgical year. This disruption is most noticeable during Great Lent. Certain feast days are designed to fall during Lent, such as the Feast of the 40 Martyrs of Sebast. The Feast of the Annunciation is also intended to fall either before Pascha or during Bright Week. Sometimes Annunciation will fall on the day of Pascha itself, a very special concurrence known as Kyrio Pascha, with special liturgical practices appointed for such an occurrence. However, under the new calendar, Kyrio Pascha becomes an impossibility. The Apostles' Fast displays the most difficult aspect of the new calendar. The fast begins on the movable cycle and ends on the fixed date of the 29th of June, since the new calendar is 13 days ahead of the traditional Julian calendar. The Apostles' Fast is 13 days shorter for those who follow the new calendar, and some years it is completely abrogated. Furthermore, critics of the new calendar point out the advantage to celebrating Nativity separately from the secular observances of Christmas and New Year, which are associated with partying and alcohol consumption. Critics also point out that proponents of the new calendar tend to use worldly rather than spiritual justification for changing the calendar, wanting to party with everyone else at Christmas, concerned that the gradual shift in the Julian calendar will somehow negatively affect the celebration of feasts that are linked to the seasons of the year. However, However, opponents counter that the seasons are reversed in the southern hemisphere, where the liturgical celebrations are no less valid. The validity of this argument is questionable, since the feasts of the Orthodox Church were not changed no matter where they were celebrated, and Orthodox services were held in the southern hemisphere with little issue centuries before the introduction of the new calendar. Proponents also argue that the new calendar is somehow more scientific, but opponents argue that science is not the primary concern of the Church. Rather, the Church is concerned with otherworldliness, with being in the world, but not of it, fixing the attention of the faithful on eternity. Scientifically speaking, neither the Gregorian calendar nor the new calendar is absolutely precise. This is because the solar year cannot be evenly divided into 24-hour segments. So any public calendar is imprecise. It is simply an agreed-upon designation of days. From a spiritual perspective, old calendarists also point to a number of miraculous occurrences which occur on the old calendar exclusively, such as the descent of the cloud on the mount on the Feast of the Transfiguration. After the calendar change was instituted, the followers of the old calendar in Greece apparently witnessed the appearance of a cross in the sky, visible to thousands on the Feast of the Exaltation of the Holy Cross 1925, of which eyewitness accounts were recorded. For such special events, if the original Julian date and year is known, then the option always exists to calculate what was the proleptic revised Julian date of that event, and then observe its anniversary on that day, if that could be socially and ritually accepted.